What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 23 of my reviewing and ranking King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard studio albums in order 1 to 23. That's where we are now. I think 25 drops in 3 days, right? In a couple days. So I'll drop. So I'm like, when I started this, there were 24, and now as I'm getting right to 25, it drops like a week before I'm actually going to review it, or 2 weeks. Kind of cool. The timing of that. Anyways, this came out in October of 2022. Changes is the 23rd studio album. Apparently it was supposed to come out in 2017. This is something they've been working on for a long time. It is a concept album in the sense that every song is the same chord changes. I think that's what it is. There's one chord progression, and every song is built around this single chord progression. Apparently, it's one of the most. I think Stu is on record saying this is not a go into the studio and jam. This is redo, overdub. Every note is carefully placed and all that kind of stuff. Very electronic sounding album. Not a guitar heavy. There are guitars in the credits as being played, but there's really only a couple moments where I'm like, hey, there's a guitar right there. It's a very, very electronic album. At times I get like new wave. Oh yeah, there's one instance in which there's a guitar that's absolutely amazing. So yeah, the guitar is present. But other than this one song in which it's like, there's like, and this is weird because I'm doing Funkadelic. I just did Funkadelic a couple weeks ago. A very Eddie Hazel March to the Witch's Castle type guitar energy that's fantastic on one of these songs. But everything else has like a 80s new wave vibe, maybe a late 70s Gary Newman vibe. A lot of electronic energy, a lot of like that kind of sound. My issue with this album, and I have a big issue with this album, and I always have to remember, or at least every time I've gone back and listened to it, I have to remember that, yeah, my issue is not indicative of the rest of the album. My issue with this album, it's a regular full-length 40-minute album. The first song is called, and something else that they do that I want to bring up, the very last song on this, the first lyric of the last song is called Short Change. I think there's like a nice instrumental intro that's kind of loose, kind of jammy, really good energy, even though it is still like electronic. It's kind of a wacky feel. It's a little more over the top, really kind of just playful. The very first lyric, I think it's the first lyric, but one of the prominent lyrics is, "Who should we please?" And then they keep going, change. Because this album kind of doesn't sound like other King Gizzard stuff. Like, if you're looking for something along the lines of like, what are the other albums? If you're looking for something along the lines of like Murder of the Universe or Nonagon Infinity, or name anything that's really, really guitar heavy in which they're jamming out, that's not what you're going to get here. Ice Death Planets, no. Different vibe. I'm In Your Mind Fuzz, different vibe. Like, all of these things, completely different vibe. A lot of electronics. And so I like that the last song is like, if you don't like this, what do you want us to do? We can't change. All humans change. It's almost like to the critics from the beginning, at the very end. I like it. I don't like the first song on this album. 13 minutes long. I like what they're going for. The 13 minutes is like, they have like the song that starts off, right? The sound of the instruments kind of remind me of Black Moth Super Rainbow, but not as cartoony and quirky and psych colorful. There's still a psych energy there, but the first song, the instrumentation, the vibe, it doesn't work with me. I do like what they do in the song. They have like your standard, the song. It's a very, kind of reminds me of Quarters a little bit. A lot of keyboard, instrumental, very jazzy. But then the lyrics come in at like almost the 2-minute mark. They're kind of airy. They're kind of, that kind of psych floatiness that they do. And they'll play like this portion of the song. and then they'll take a break where the drums drop out for, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds, and you get these awesome like atmospheric keyboard sounds, and then the drums come back in, but the song's slightly going off in a different direction. And then that will happen again. The drums will drop out after a certain length of time, they come back in, and we're off in like another slightly different direction. And so you can tell even within this one song, they're taking this chord progression, and every time they kind of come back in with drums, kind of just doing something slightly different with it. There are a couple moments that work great around the 5.5 minute mark. The tempo is much more up tempo, becomes much more lively, has a lot more of a bounce into it, kind of a nice different vibe. And then around the 8 minute mark, you get some really proggy kind of synth sounds that come in that are really cool. And then around the 11.5 minute mark, you just get this final burst of energy as we race towards the finish line. It is not a bad song, but I always forget when I listen to this album, because I'm like, okay, this has its moments. I see what they're doing. I kind of enjoy it, but a lot of the sounds just don't work for me. A lot of the ideas don't work for me. But then after I'm done with this first song, which is a third of the album, the rest of this album is friggin' amazing. The rest of this album is fun, eclectic, it's beautiful, it's interesting. It has one of the greatest guitar moments they've done in that Eddie Hazel inspired type song. It is just a completely, I think, a better vibe and a different vibe. And I think each of these songs also has that chord progression, but I've also read interviews in which like they just take different versions of, I don't know, but they're like, all the songs either relate to that chord progression or they relate to change and chord progressions in change. Either way, it doesn't matter. If you didn't know there was a concept in this album, it's still a good listen. But my main complaint is I wish change was last. And maybe I would come around to it more, and the more low-key, not as aggressive beginning part of it would work better as not an opener, because tracks 2 through 7 are simply some of the best stuff they've ever done. It is absolutely amazing. Number 2, Hate Dancing. This is like, hey, 70s vibe. It's like King Gizzard doing 70s soft rock, but with like a nice kind of upbeat tempo. It's not like really bread, airy soft rock, but like, you know, some like danceable, singable soft rock from the 70s. It's got like some little bit of funk to it, but it's definitely got a softer vibe than most King Gizzard stuff. A lot more looser than the opener. And like, I think even the basic putting Hate Dancing first and Change second and having Hate Dancing as an opener makes this a better album. Putting Change last, I think, makes it a much better album. But even the switching of those first two, and I think it's already a better album. Then we get AstroTurf. Kind of a bigger sound, much more dramatic type drums coming in. The synth sounds are kind of spacier. They kind of work better. The drumming on AstroTurf reminds me of the Flaming Lips Are You a Hypnotist off of Yoshimi, Battles the Pink Robots. But it's just got that really playful drum beat that is like the core of the song, and really funky, good use of like the hi-hat and stuff like that. It's a very colorful, playful, there's like a loose jammy section in it. We're still very much soaked in electronic sounds, but the energy is just much freer and much looser. And even though every note apparently was pinpointed and was like made sure those were the notes, the vibe is much looser. AstroTurf is just a fantastic, fantastic song. Then we get Nobody, 2 words, Nobody. And this starts off with this slow Eddie Hazel sounding guitar intro that reminds me of Funkadelic, gives me sort of not quite as psyche crazy as Maggot Brain, but kind of like March to the Witch's Castle type vibe. Absolutely beautiful. And this is like a nice slow burning groove. It's just like sweet psych funk music. It is so good. I think the very first lyric is I floated up, and that's the way when it comes in, that whatever that guitar like theme is when it comes in, it's just got that like floating kind of psych, it is a fantastic song. Number 5 is Gondii, Gondii. This one is much more of like sterile. I don't know if sterile is the right word, but that very machine-like late 70s Gary Newman electronic vibe, where it's obviously electronic and there's not much warmth to it. It's very rigid and machine-like, but they're doing good stuff with it. Like, they're making it work. Really good energy. Got really super funky. Kind of reminds me of like a new wave meets like the vocal energy in this. There's a little more energy put into the vocals, and even though it's very much still a new wave sound, the energy that's coming in with some of the vocals and the way the band's kind of responding kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Eurythmics. When they, every once in a while, when they let Annie Lennox just like, "Would I die for you?" You know, they just let her go off. That has that energy. It's nowhere near as explosive as anything Annie Lennox would do. But we're starting to get a little bit of that feel, a little bit of that vibe. Really good song, great energy in this song. Just absolutely fantastic. Next is Exploding Suns, which is the kind of slow, jazzy ballad of the album. Really chill vibes. And even though the vibes are really chill, it is a beautiful song musically. It is perfectly placed in the sequencing of the album. Everything about it works perfectly, and it almost feels like, all right, like we get a chill. But then when you listen to the lyrics, it's like, I think they're asking like, what's it going to be like after Armageddon? You know, what's going to happen? Exploding Suns. There we go. It's all in the title. So even though the music is presenting maybe something a little bit like not as frightening as their normal lyrics, just dealing with like environmental catastrophes and political catastrophes and the end of the world and all that kind of stuff. Musically, it's a lot more comforting and soothing than the message that they're telling. And then the last song is Short Change, which is by far the most like playful, all over the place, good energy. I don't know if wacky is the right word. A good portion of it is instrumental, like before we get the first lyrics. And this also reminds me of Yoshimi and the Pink Robots. It reminds me of part 2 of that. Part 1 is the acoustic song when, you know, he describes the story. And then part 2 is that crazy over-the-top instrumental when they're actually doing battle, Yoshimi and those Pink Robots. This is not as aggressive as that, but the energy, the kind of wackiness, the kind of left field vibes that still work within the context of the album, but at the same time sound a lot more playful than the rest of the album. It's a great track. And like to think if they put Change last and they have these 6 tracks first, these absolutely banger tracks first, and then they drop the 13-minute epic at the end. This is a band, they have a number of albums. I'll probably miss a couple. I can't even think of them now that I'm looking at it. But definitely Float Along. I'm in Your Mind. Yeah, not my mind's blanking now that I'm looking at it. But which they have so many albums in which that first song is like a grand slam home run. And like, I don't care what they do after that because like they've hit the ball out of the park already. So just do whatever. I'm happy. It's not the case with this album. I've yet to really, really get into that first song. And like, I won't skip it. Like I'll listen to it just because I know it's going to grow on me. And I do appreciate like, there are sections like that 5.5 minute sort of up tempo I like, the proggy around 8, that extra burst of energy at the end. Those are good moments. But I do think the opening track, the longest track, I think it's the weakest track on here. And it's just not as, I think maybe they spent too much time maybe tinkering with it and it lost a little bit of the spontaneity. The other ones seem to have energy and seem to have life and seem to be a little more spontaneous and seem to be a little more King Gizzardy. The first one seems too much of a project that maybe they lost sight of the fun. I'm sure not. I'm sure they had a great time. I'm sure they love it. But that's just my opinion. But this is a great album. Great album. Yeah. Where would I rank it? I had to consider the fact that essentially a third of this album, 13 minutes of it, is not my favorite King Gizzard. So factoring that in, I dropped this album back at 14, right behind Polygondwana Land, behind that Flying Microtonal Banana, behind that energy from those like 2017, 18, 19 albums. but above like Butterfly 3000, all those. It's a great album. Like, you get rid of Changes, you get rid of the title track, and you make this an EP that's like 26 minutes long. I'm jumping this up to like maybe set right behind Laminated Denim and Omnium Gatherum. That's how much I really like those last 6 songs. But I have to penalize the album because the opening track, and it being the opening track, I think hurts it. Like, again, if it was a closing track, by that time I'm in such a good mood, I'm willing to go through it. But the opening sounds, I don't want to say it sounds cheap, because it doesn't sound cheap, but it doesn't sound, I just don't like the sound. It just doesn't make me happy. It's not something I look forward to. Though, the more I listen to it, I finally get into it. But yeah, that's all I got to say, which is a lot of rambling going on. I'm sorry. But I highly recommend you check this album out. And maybe don't start with the first song. It's 13 minutes. If you don't like it, that's 13 minutes wasted. Start with song number 2 and go from there. I think song number 2, also kind of a chill, soft rock opener. And then it opens the door and says, enter, this is the world we are in right now. And then things just get increasingly weirder, and then they get beautiful, and then they get epic, and then like they get wacky. And then you go to the long, slow boat ride at the end with the change. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this album. I'm 2 away from the end of King Gizzard. I'm definitely jumping into the live stuff after that because live King Gizzard, people. But anyways, one of the only bands, one of 3 bands, no, I've seen 4. One of 4 bands I've seen on my birthday twice. Seen King Gizzard on my birthday twice, seen The Dead on my birthday twice, seen Fish on my birthday twice. Fish, it was consecutive years. And seen Blue Oyster Cult on my birthday twice. No other band have I seen on my birthday twice. But anyways, yeah, King Gizzard, man, absolutely fantastic. Love this. Good album, great album. I highly recommend it. With all those caveats and exceptions and asterisks that I just went through. But anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this album, where you would rank it, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, subscribe, like, share, comment, and go listen to King Gizzard, people, because they're easily the best psych band of the 21st century. I don't even think that's up for discussion. But I would love to know who you think is better, because I'm ready for that. And I'd like to check them out, because if they even compare to King Gizzard, they're worth checking out. All right, I'm rambling again. Peace. Talk to you later.